Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of the Swift Academy podcast. Today, I'm very happy to be with Marek Fořt and Pedro Buendia from Tuist. They are coming to speak about Tuist, how using Tuist, everything about Tuist that and the knowledge about using this fantastic solution for iOS developers. How are you, Marek and Pedro?
Hey, guys. Yeah, I'm pretty good. Thanks for inviting us over. We're always excited to talk about Tuist and Xcode and anything mobile related overall.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, same. It's always a pleasure to be invited to talk about what we do every day. So it's gonna be fun, like sharing everything that we discuss every day, the things that we do at Twist and Xcode projects in general. It's a domain that we're very excited about.
Okay, great. I think that the topics is fantastic because I like very much everything related to Xcode, build setting, how to configure, and a little, I think a lot of developers, not a little, like this kind of discussion about what we call the very technical aspect of our tools, which is Xcode, and how we can improve our daily working using tools like Twist. Okay, but before that, I would like to speak about to ask you about your career. I think that you have a great career before coming to Twist in Shopify, etc. Can you share a little bit about your journey in software development generally, and what inspired you to work in the Apple ecosystem? Because it's usually the same question for people that are in our community. What motivated you? Because I try to ask that. I don't know, Marek or Pedro. You can chat up here.
Maybe Pedro, you want to go next, as you have a longer career, and I joined you later on in the Twist journey, so it makes sense chronologically speaking for you to start.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I can share like I was at the uni. I studied in Spain at the time. I learned about programming. I was doing C at the time, MATLAB.
Okay.
And there was this friend that told me, like, have you seen this iOS development thing? I got an iPhone, so he showed me what one could do with Objective-C at the time. And it was kind of amazing because we went from like some functions in C, you pass a string, you get a string, and suddenly you can actually draw something on the device that you use. And I found the whole thing very exciting. So that's when I decided I studied electrical engineering, but I ended up programming. And iOS was my first kind of platform. First Objective-C, eventually Swift. I was working in Barcelona at the time. I moved to Berlin. That was 2015, and I was working at SoundCloud at the time. So it was a large team. It was a very modular code base. A lot of Objective-C. Eventually Swift. And it was there when I realized that it is all fine with Xcode and Xcode projects if things are small, just one module. But when you have a lot of developers, a lot of modules, multiple programming languages, the whole thing becomes, I like to say that it goes from being fun to not being fun. Because when you start fighting the tool, the thing is not fun anymore. That's when I had the idea of like doing something about it, because really the alternatives at the time was back as a build system. You would see companies like Facebook talking about it, then some people talking about Bazel, and I was like, that's too complex. Then I had the idea of like doing project generation, which is what, I mean, if people have used CocoaPods in the past, that's what these people do. Like they generated projects with dependencies and they integrated them into their projects. So I decided to do something similar, but instead of solving dependency management, the idea was to solve Xcode projects complexity and frequent Git conflicts. I did some work there. I didn't know if people would end up using something like this. Marek showed up later. Some companies showed up. So it turned out to be useful. And then when I left SoundCloud, Shopify contacted me because they were looking for a mobile tooling developer. So it was exactly what I was doing. It's such a niche job. You don't find that many mobile tooling developers out there. So they recognized me as one of those. I joined them. I was working as a mobile tooling developer. I was all the time maintaining Twist on the side. People thought that Shopify used Twist. They did not ever. They eventually transitioned to React Native. So, and at the time I was no longer working in the mobile tooling space. the one common denominator that persisted was that I like building tools for developers. It doesn't matter if it's for mobile, for web. I like building CLIs. So this is something that I did my whole time at Shopify. And then working on the side, working with Marek, working with all the contributors, all the maintainers, like building community. It's something, when people think of Tuist these days, they think it's something that, like maybe it's something that has been done in the past 2 years. It's been 8 years of work, building community, building brand, and all of that. So at some point, there was this moment, like I think it was 2 years ago, when like it was sexy to lay off employees in tech companies. So I was targeted by one of those layoffs. So that's when I thought, like,
Yes.
do I want to go again through this, like working in big tech, climbing the ladder, or I would rather think about doing my work at Tuist full time. That's when I reached out to Marek, and then we are now both doing this work as a full time thing.
Yes.
I don't have as much time as I used to have for developing, but I still enjoy doing development a lot, and that's a bit of
Okay.
a summary.
Yes. Thank you, Pedro. And for you, Marek.
Yeah. I guess as many people in our part of the industry, I started being interested in programming because of using Apple devices. So my first one was iPhone, and I was like, back then I was a teenager, so I was just like using all the apps, and at some point I was like, maybe it would be cool also write one of my own. So I learned back then also Objective-C. Eventually switched to Swift, got my first job when I was back in high school, and then I went to also study programming, or like it was called a Faculty of Information Technologies or Computer Science. Went to study it in Prague. I joined the mobile agency, and that's also a period where I stumbled upon Tuist. I came to it from a bit of a different angle than Pedro. We were not necessarily dealing with a huge scale because it was a mobile agency, so it was rather that we would create a lot of new apps, but not necessarily those apps wouldn't reach a scale of like SoundCloud, Spotify, and other big players. But there it was quite important, or quite a bit of a hassle, to try to keep sort of the structure of the different projects unified. So being able to have a declarative definition of a project was pretty handy. We were also doing some white labeling of apps. In other words, we were having the same app with different icons, different names, for example, for festivals. And that's also where project generation was quite useful, because there you can quite easily, again, define it declaratively that you only want to change like a couple of things about your project and don't have to maintain everything by hand. So that's how I stumbled upon Tuist. Back then, the integration with SwiftPM in Xcode was quite new. And it was not implemented in Tuist. So I was like, can I implement it? And then Pedro was like, yeah, do it. I mean, I can give you a hand. And that felt like a very supportive environment. So I went ahead with that, and kind of once I landed that feature, I kind of just went on and kind of kept contributing. At some point, Pedro was like, you seem pretty good. Maybe you want to join Shopify. And I was still at the uni, so I told him that I need to finish my studies first. And then after I finish, I actually joined Shopify and moved to Berlin. And I was there for around 3 years. As Pedro mentioned, in Shopify, I moved to doing React Native. So I was there as a part of sort of React Native core team at Shopify, which essentially meant doing internal tools related to React Native for other Shopify developers. So I still also stayed in the space of developer tooling. And after the layoffs happened, which I was not impacted, but at some point I also decided to quit Shopify and join Pedro to work on Tuist full time. And that's what I've been doing the last year or so.
Yes, great. great career and also aspiration for people that developers that because it's not an easy to be like Pedro said tooling iOS developers. I don't think that let's come to my next question. How it's easy for you to create this kind of tools because for my point of view it's not to create table view, to create collection view, something what we call front end developing, but this is tooling. You need to understand behind the scene how what kind of resource that you learn or because when you check in the Apple documentation it's not easy to understand the PBX approach, the build setting, how things work under the hood. How people can what kind of I can say what kind of steps especially for you, Marek, because maybe Pedro that come from your case, you come from university. It's not. I don't know. Maybe they have some course specific to this kind of things, or also checking in the internet, reading the documentation, which is not easy. What do you think about that?
I think at least, I mean, everybody's different. For me, what
Okay.
works the best is learn by doing. So
Okay.
I learned sort of the PBX approach format and all the internal stuff of Xcode and sort of the whole developer tooling space by just trying to implement features, fix bugs. And as a process of that, you just get to, first of all, learn how these things work under the hood, sort of get a sense of how you can go about, for example, reverse engineering some of the internal Xcode formats that are not publicly documented, where you cannot just read
Yes.
the documentation for those things. And also kind of, so one thing about developer tooling is in the mobile space, especially in the iOS space, is to understand sort of Xcode tools and how they work. And again, a lot of them are not documented. The other part is sort of taking that knowledge and kind of making something useful out of it. So how can we take the internal definition of Xcode and how can we abstract it into something that's a little bit more understandable for people, a little bit more easier to use? And that also comes a lot with experience and also trying all the different tools. And both with Pedro, we also just watch a lot of the things that are happening either in the mobile space or in other spaces like the web ecosystem and try to just follow what things are happening there. And quite often we can just take inspiration from all of the other ecosystems and see whether they can be useful in our context. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marek. That comes to my next question to Pedro. What motivated you to create Tuist? I think that something that came to you to okay, we need to create a solution like Tuist because there is other solution that comes from like SPM, like XcodeGen, etc. What motivated you to create something like Tuist and also to create also a company, if you can say it, free, open source project like thing?
I mean, I have a personality that when something kind of spoils the momentum or the flow of building something, I get very uncomfortable.
Okay.
That can be complexity in Xcode. That can be slowness with SPM resolving packages. Whatever makes me uncomfortable, I have like something that tells me do something about it. That's for example, in our day-to-day working in Tuist, like constantly like discussing like, are you happy with this? Because we're not. Then we jump into like thinking about how to solve it. If we think it makes sense to solve it, like sometimes we would basically we would go too far from the ecosystem, which is never a good idea. But like if we think we can solve it and we have some ideas for how to do it, we just go ahead and like do it. In the case of Tuist at the time, the two main pain points was frequent Git conflicts,
Yes.
which are now finally addressed by I think it's called synchronized groups in Xcode 16, which is amazing.
Yes.
The second piece is complexity in modular Xcode projects. This still remains, and I believe is the reason why many people are using SPM as a modularization tool, which I don't think it is the best solution for that. But anyways, these were the two problems that we set out to solve at the time. Then the whole thing evolved into, like people are using this. We get a lot of requests, a lot of support stuff, and that's when, in the same way we think about solving problems, technical problems, we had a sustainability problem to solve, which is how can we do this in a way that we can continue doing this for the community for as long as we can. And this is another problem that because we like the domain, we set out to solve it. That's when the idea of building a company came into us. And this is like our day to day, and this is something that we're trying to put also in the community and like kind of inspire other people to do the same. So if there's something that you think is worth solving, as Marek said, like you can get theoretical about this and like read books about CLIs or Xcode projects or whatever, but it's really scratching your own itch. And if you're motivated by scratching your own itch, you can go long distances. So that was the case in Tuist, and that's what drives us every day.
Yes, great. I think that usually it's a question of practice. It's important to read books for me and to read the documentation, but after that, we try to practice and to keep consistently in practice. And that's kind of another question for me, because Tuist is an open source project, and they have maintains their what we call the core team of Tuist. And what are the biggest challenge that you faced in building this kind of tools like Tuist, and to maintain especially the Tuist, because it's an open source like Vapor, like something like that. There is also the core team like you, Pedro and Marek, and other contributors that come. How you can you are sure that everything is good, and what kind of discussion for new topics with other contributor, how you can organize your work to maintain the project, the testability of the project, and the evolution of the project, especially because it's an open source project. I don't know, Marek or Pedro.
I can take that one. So I think there are a lot of nuances to this discussion because one could say Tuist is not open source. We have some components that are open source, but the whole Tuist is not open source. Tuist itself started as an open source technology on CLI. Technology was project generation, and the project generation was shipped or distributed within a CLI, which was open source. But with the business and entering the space, then it came a server, and the server is closed source. So now part of the functionality of the CLI is actually interfacing with a server. So we've gone from we're pure CLI, pure open source, pure everything is free, to now some components are free, some technologies are open source, like the Xcode Proj library, the project generation logic is open source, the CLI itself is open source, but then you are interfacing with a server side component that is closed source, and this was a necessary step for the business. Otherwise, we could not really secure funding for the project. Our plans are really to be like GitLab and Posthoc and Discourse and all these companies whose server is also open source. But before we get there, we need to figure out a way to basically capture value and capture monetary value so that we can sustain in the development. So long term, we would like to get back to everything is open source. That's the short answer. We're working on making that happen. The day-to-day, I'll let Marek answer this because he's the one that is closer to the community these days, but it's actually tricky. But maybe Marek, you want to share more?
Yes. Yeah. So we have a couple of support channels or ways how people can report ideas, issues. We use GitHub as the primary tool. Then we have a community forum, and then we have Slack. Long term, we're trying to move a little bit away from Slack because people ask questions that have been asked before. They are not indexed by Google, so nobody outside of the Slack community can actually find those answers to those questions. So that's why we now trying to move to a model where sort of questions and troubleshooting and
Okay.
ideas are put on the community forum, which is indexed by Google. And that's kind of if you don't have like a specific issue with reproducible sample, that's kind of where you would sort. And then GitHub issue is really for us as a tracker of things that are really well defined, and either they are well-defined bugs with a reproducible sample with the reproduction steps, or it's a new feature, but that's also has been already discussed on the forum. The prioritization, that's sort of a little bit more fluid. Often it's when we hear 3 people complaining that this doesn't work in the latest version, then that's one of the things that we would jump on first. If it's a small, like, minor bug where it's so sort of unorthodox setup, and we've seen a lot of unorthodox things happening in the community, or things that like are very, very niche. The other day I've seen like somebody needing to a macOS app depending on another macOS app, which is a scenario that might make sense in some places, but it's not necessarily what 95% of iOS developers are doing. So those things are kind of put a little bit on the side. There's also, we try with most issues that come in, we try to put out pointers for people to be able to solve them themselves. And then the core team and kind of me and Pedro try to jump on the things that we think are really kind of high priority, are an issue for wide variety of users, like a big part of the user base or the customers. So yeah, that's sort of the general guideline that we have around taking in issues and ideas.
Okay, great. That come to me to speak and to deep dive into the Tuist, especially in comparison with solution like SPM and XcodeGen, that I think that the community often use it for lot number of years. Like in our company, we use until now XcodeGen using YAML, etc. And also we try to combine XcodeGen with SPM, something like spaghetti with XcodeGen and SPM, because we think that it's a modular solution. But I think that you can convince the community how are the limitations in this solution and how Tuist can improve things, especially for modular project. Don't know, Pedro or Marek, you want to answer the questions? Question.
We can take that one. So as I said before, like there were 2 problems that we were trying to solve. Complex modular Xcode projects, that is one. And the second one is frequent Git conflicts. So Tuist focus on the 2. XcodeGen, which, by the way, like at the time I started building Tuist, the maintainer of XcodeGen showed up and he told me I'm going to go something similar to Tuist, but with YAML. And I said, fine, like we're actually aiming for something different. So we made different decisions there. And his focus was more on basically mapping Xcode projects more closely and like describing everything in a YAML. And he got rid of the frequent Git conflicts, which is something that you achieve by using glob patterns to say, instead of like you reference every file individually, you say include everything in this folder, which, as I said before, this is something that Xcode 16 solves. If no one has implemented that in their projects, please do it. You will be thankful for that. I saw yesterday a blog post saying you should migrate to that, and I would tell everyone to do it because it's amazing. The second piece is complexity of modular Xcode projects. I believe XcodeGen started doing something like that, but we started doing that much earlier. We put a strong focus on that. So the result of that is internally we have this thing called Xcode Graph, which is an in-memory representation of your project graph. And because we invested much earlier on that, we can analyze it, we can optimize it, we can make changes, you can go from static to dynamic, we can turn sources into binaries, and we can optimize it in a way that no other tool out there can do. Because maintaining modular Xcode projects is still a pain in the ass, and people know. People feel it. I think people feel the pain. I don't know if they will be able to put a word on what happens, but I think they feel the pain, which is suddenly I have 20 targets, 20 dependencies, some of which
Yes.
are frameworks, some of which are libraries, and suddenly my thing doesn't compile, and I don't know why. And I believe the reason why people are starting to use SPM as a project manager tool is because they're actually trying to move away from the pain. But SPM is not really like it was a tool that was designed for dependency management. The fact that people are using it for something else makes it very tricky to use. If you look at the DX of SPM, when you try to use it as a project manager, you see the spinner in the top, like reloading packages. You make some changes, and suddenly you're holding your Xcode renders unusable. That is because SPM was never designed to be a project manager. The fact that the community uses it for that doesn't mean it's the best solution for the job. And now you are finding people kind of in between. Like we've seen people going from, I don't know, I use XcodeGen, but then people are using SPM for this, so I'm going to move part of my project to SPM. But SPM is not really idea from the DX point of view, developer experience. So then I'm going to go back to Tuist, and now I'm kind of in this in-between world. I would tell everyone that if your project is modular and you're dealing with all those complexities, I don't think SPM is a solution today. It might be in the future, but we are not really seeing any move from Apple that indicates this is going to become a project manager. I think Xcode projects will continue to be the solution for that. And we might see improvements, not in SPM as a tool for that, but rather in Xcode projects in the same way we've seen Apple solving Git conflicts. When that will happen, it's hard to tell.
Okay, I think that if I understand you, this is like a misconception of the role of SPM, because a lot of people think that SPM is for modularization. And if we have SPM, it's not only for handling dependency, but also to make things with different target, many targets, etc. And that's why people move forward from solution like Xcode Pros based on Cocoa Pods to SPM, thinking that SPM is for modularization. And I think it's a lot of misconception of the role of SPM, if I understand you.
Meaning it can be that tool.
Yes.
It is not the best tool for that based on how it was designed. At the end of the day, what you have are two things. First, you have a way to describe a graph. In Xcode projects, the graph is implicitly codified in the Xcode projects and workspaces. In the case of SPM, that is in the package of Swift. But at the end of the day, you're constructing a graph. One of them is you decode it, and then you have it right there. In the case of SPM, you have to be compiling every single package of Swift to construct the whole graph. That is where the asynchrony of Xcode using SPM comes from. Then there is the second part, which is the build system. So now Apple is trying to unify the build system, but for a long time, it was two build systems. So you compile your project, and then SPM is doing something, Xcode is doing something. They need to talk to each other. They need to reconcile things. And suddenly, my project doesn't compile. I get duplicated symbols, or my previous are not working, and people complain, and they're like, what? So now, even though Apple is now unifying the build system, we're still dealing with these two graphs. One where the source of truth is packages of Swift. The other one where the source of truth is the Xcode project. One loads fast. The other one takes time. That's where you see this whole asynchrony in Xcode. And this is where I think so what I often wonder is if package manager is going to be the project manager in the future, that's going to happen. I personally wonder a lot if Swift is the right language for that. Because when you look at build systems out there, like Bazel, Back, or even Gradle, what they have in common is that they don't compile the manifest files. They don't compile those files. They evaluate them, and they are designed in such a way that they minimize side effects, which, by the way, in packages, you can have side effects. So is it the best solution for the job? I don't think it is. Neither Swift nor all the concept behind it, behind the SPM.
Okay, great.
There's even a programming configuration language from Apple. They don't use it for iOS development, but they actually developed it as well. So they do realize there's something to configuration languages being sort of subset of more generic programming languages, and that being useful, because otherwise there's a lot of things, a lot of side effects, or the compilation that you don't really want in configuration languages. You want them to be simple, and you want them to be compiled or parsed as quickly as possible. And that's sort of has never been the goal of Swift. So having like a specific language for that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, even with the using of the different kind of type of compilation, incremental compilation, or this kind of that Apple offer to increase the time of compilation, you think that this kind of solution using SPM maybe increase the time of compilation, and also now it's much easy to have, because as Pedro said, we have like the same system of compilation between the main target and also the other dependency based on SPM, and maybe I don't know, maybe you have some information about this kind of type of compilation can impact the time, even using Tuist, if you can say. What you call incremental, I think fast. There is some types of compilation that impact the time of compilation and the using of what we call static dynamic frameworks.
Could you rephrase the question a little bit? I don't know.
Okay, this kind of type of incremental, when you find in the build setting, there is a list of types of how can this types of compilation impact the time using Swift SPM or Tuist or something else of solutions.
I mean, if you have incremental compilation, then things will compile faster. But it's never going to be as fast as with the configuration languages that are just parsed immediately. And if you change something in a package at Swift, it just needs to be recompiled. Sure, if most of the other package.swift files have not changed, then most of the stuff stays static and doesn't have to be recompiled, but you still need to at least recompile one file, and fortunately it's still going to be slow. And then if you edit a lot of them and you have a large project, then that quickly kind of compounds. That's also why, I mean, SwiftPM is fine for modularization if you have like 10 modules, maybe 20 modules, and like a relatively small code base. I see a lot of indie developers using SwiftPM for modularization, and I think for that scale it probably works pretty well. But then when you start to apply it to larger projects, then that's where you kind of run into issues. There was a blog post that we often reference from Bumble, where they compared SwiftPM as a project manager with Tuist and with just Xcode, I think it was, like Xcode primitives. And yeah, they found that some of the operations that are just instant when you have an Xcode project or an Xcode project generated by Tuist are instant, like deleting a file, an operation that one would think should be instant. But with SwiftPM, because it's all, the whole graph is quite, like, all the time it needs to be dynamically resolved in large projects, that again compounds, and operations like just deleting a file or changing, like you change something in a package at Swift and you click save, and then suddenly Xcode needs to compile that file, and then it needs to basically redo the whole graph from scratch because it doesn't necessarily know what exactly has changed. That's then a big problem for larger projects, because then they just see the spinner and have to wait like 10-15 seconds to see the change. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's come to another section in our discussion, because a lot of people think that Tuist is only for generating Xcode project modularization, something like that. But there is another key features that you find, like caching, what we call selective testing, CI/CD integration. Can you maybe speak about that a little bit, about all these things, because caching, selective testing, all these tools really are amazing in the Tuist project, and maybe Pedro, you can speak about that, maybe about the caching.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to reconnect because my AirPods.
No problem. Yes.
Hopefully, this whole thing will synchronize with the magic of AI or whatever it's using on the hood. But yeah, answering that. Yeah, as I said before, we were purely a project generation tool, and building like an internal graph showed us that suddenly we had information that we didn't have before, and that is useful in two ways. First, we can help you understand your projects, because it's something that when you ask people like, can you tell me about your projects? Can you tell me what are the bottlenecks of compilation that prevents parallelization? Can you tell me what are the flaky tests? People tell you, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't
Yes.
know, and if
General.
things are slow, I just throw more engineers into the problem, or I just switch to Bazel or React Native or something, instead of like optimizing the workflow. So suddenly we have this source of information that we didn't have before. So we could
Yes.
actually build tools to help people understand their projects. Things like
Mm.
graph, like I want to see my thing visually so that I know how it looks, or selective testing, where instead of like testing everything all the time, I only test
Yes.
the modules that have been impacted by the changes. So we have tools for providing information about the projects, and also optimizing them. And at the same time, we're thinking about, like we want to build a source of revenue for the project so that we can have people working full time on this. And that's when
Yes.
we realized that a lot of these solutions that solve challenges that the large enterprises face are solutions that require a server. Like you need to store state in a server. If you want to see, for
Yes.
example, if something is flaky, you need to store the result of a test across multiple runs. You need a database for that. If you want to
Yes.
see if your build times are getting better or worse, you need a server for that, because you need to store different values of build times over time. So a database means a server. Server means suddenly you need an account. An account means
Yes.
it's something that you can charge money for. If it's
Yes.
a CLI, don't ask people to pay. Like that
Yes.
never works. But if suddenly you have server-side features, then it makes like it kind of aligns with the mental model of people of, if it's a server, if I need an account, if someone has to maintain a database on a server, it makes sense for me to pay for it. So Tuist
Yes.
went on, sure, like we continue to have this project generation feature, but on top of that, you can basically share that information with the server and let the server help you first understand your project, and second to optimize it. So you find features like, our focus is always on productivity. So caching. So how can we make your compilation go faster by reusing binaries for modules? Selective testing, which means how can we only run the tests that are impacted by your changes? The combination of the two can help you achieve 90% of 90% or 80% of improvement, depending on your modular architecture. Uh, Registry. A lot of people were complaining about the slowness of SPM. So can we do something there? Previews. Can we make it super easy for you to share your work with anyone in the organization by just sharing a link? And if you
Yes.
look at what all these solutions have in common, they all need a server. So we're finding this right balance of, cool, there are client-side technologies which we maintain. They are open source. They are part of the CLI, but the CLI can also interface with a server to provide all these different solutions. And the whole thing is super interesting. We're still, I know it's hard, like when you talk to other ecosystems like the web, for example, getting data from their tools, from their projects, from their servers, to understand them, to make informed decisions is such a common thing. Like
Yes.
it's a must. Like if you have a server, you have a Grafana dashboard to see
Yes.
if your
Yes.
queries are slow, to see if your deployments are fast. Like it's necessary, it's mandatory. But in this ecosystem, there's nothing. Like there are some tools here and there, some open source. There is Xlog parser, Xmetrics by Spotify, like some tools here and there. But at the end of the day, it's you, the one that has to kind of bring all these tools together, combine them, talk to your infrastructure team, get something deployed in some server, and the whole thing doesn't really. It's not that appealing. So Twist is building this integrated tool chain. So you just install the CLI, sign up, boom, and then you have data, you have everything, and now you can make decisions that you were not able to do before.
Okay, great. Imagine that people now who listen or watch us, okay, we try to migrate to using Twist. We are in solution like SPM and or XcodeGen based. And what what kind of challenges the team is facing during this kind of situation, this kind of transition? Basically, when they use a solution like SPM or XcodeGen, I think that in your documentation you speak about that, but maybe Marek, you can speak how it's smoothly to migrate from SPM, Xcodegen to Twist, and what kind of challenges from your experience or contact with your if we can say clients or people, what kind of challenges they faced during this transition?
So one thing before answering that question I would add is a lot of the features that we've now been putting out don't even require you to have generated project with Tuist, because we are really trying to keep as close as we can to the ecosystem. And if there's a feature that doesn't actually require the generated projects, which are sort of kind of shifting a little bit away from kind of the common way how to maintain your projects, then we try to do so. So for example, recently we also made selective testing work with non-generated projects. The primary feature that apart from project generation that does require project generation is caching, because that's something that just we haven't been able to solve without using project generation as kind of a building block. So for if you want to use binary caching in your project, then you do need to kind of migrate to the Tuist way of project generation. Then getting back to your question, there are sort of three kind of the most common setups that we've seen people when migrating to Tuist. So you mentioned SwiftPM and XcodeGen, and the third one is I'm not using anything. I'm just using Xcode. So when you're just using Xcode, that's kind of usually the most complex transition, because that's where your projects are implicitly sort of defined in the PBX approach format. And you have to kind of go manually either through the PBX approach or through the Xcode GUI interface. You have to go and kind of manually transition things into being declarative. And usually that's also when you find things are maybe in a little bit of a messy state, where you edit, there are missing dependencies here and there, and then when you put things into Tuist, suddenly the fact that there's a missing dependency, things stop working before it was just sort of working by accident in a way. So that's sort of the most complex migration. When you have a project already defined with either SwiftPM or XcodeGen, then things are generally easier. If you have it with SwiftPM, we actually also are quite compatible with that setup already. So you can keep even most of your modules as packaged Swift, and only rewrite sort of the app target, because that one cannot be defined with SwiftPM. And then as your needs evolve, then you still might want to consider moving the package that's with definition to the Tuist project that's with definition, which is sort of a superset of package that's with. And if you use project that's with over package that's with, then there are a couple of things where Tuist features work a little bit better, but most of the benefits you would still gain even if you kept most of your project still defined with package that's with. You just change sort of the root app target to be defined by Tuist. And XcodeGen it's also sort of declarative, but as Pedro mentioned before, it's a little bit more low level than Tuist. So you'll need to sort of take a couple of things here and there and like basically go through your XcodeGen definition, and each XcodeGen YAML will be roughly directly translatable to project that's with, but you'll have to just kind of pluck out the stuff that Tuist actually needs, because Tuist just needs a little bit less than XcodeGen. But generally speaking, everything that you can do with Xcode and that's with XcodeGen is also possible to do with Tuist. So it's just like sometimes the mental model is a little bit different when converting from XcodeGen. So it's really more, you'd have to get a little bit more familiar with the project that's with definition. It will take you a little bit, but usually if you have a project defined with either XcodeGen or SwiftPM, like being able to generate the whole thing with Tuist should be like a matter of really days. It shouldn't be a migration that should take you longer than that.
Okay, great. Thank you for this explanation. You spoke a lot about what we call dependency graph. And I think it's very important topics. And there is a lot of misunderstand. People didn't understand that there is a dependency graph. When we launched the application using Xcode, there is what the system under the hood create what this kind of dependency graph. What kind of interest, I think, that you have worked to optimize the dependency graph resolution between framework or targets, if you can say. What are techniques and algorithms, Pedro, that you use in Twist to manage efficiently, if you can say it, the dependency graph resolution, or something that help the application to compile or to detect some problem between frameworks, this kind of things.
Yes, as I said before, the graph is implicitly
Yes.
codified in Xcode projects. So when you define a build phase for linking, or you add some build setting for linking, you are declaring
Yes.
a dependency. In some cases, you do it explicitly. So you say A depends on B. In
B.
other cases, you do import B and B is linked. That's what we call implicit dependencies. And this is
Yes.
actually the source of many issues with incremental builds not working reliably or builds accidentally compiling. So this is something you've probably noticed that Apple is trying to move away from. Like they're asking people to be explicit about their modules.
Mm.
The thing with Twist is that because of the DSL, the language that we provide you
Yes.
to describe the graph, we force you to make things explicit. Still, you can do implicit things, but you will most likely end up with a very explicit graph. So Twist knows all the details of what depends on what. So A depends on B, B depends on C, and C depends on some
Yes.
package from the community. Once you have the graph, or once we had the graph, we were thinking, can we then turn some of those targets into XC frameworks? If you think of Carthage, imagine going
Yes.
from your dependencies being managed as sources, like what CocoaPods would do, and then suddenly you switch some of them to binaries, like the ones that Carthage provide. Can we do that dynamically? Since Xcode can generate the project, since Twist can generate the projects, can we do this switching of I don't know, like I want this one to be now a binary and this other one to be a binary as well. So we did a proof of concept and it actually worked because we take the graph, we have it in memory, and then we can traverse the graph and we can say, for this one I have a binary, for this one I also have a binary, and for that one I also have a binary. If I replace them, if you then make sure that build settings at the build phases are correct, then your projects will compile in the same way. The only difference is that before you were transitively compiling those products and putting them in derived data and linking them from derived data. And you go from now those binaries live somewhere in the Twist cache, and then you link them against those files in the Twist cache directory. We did a proof of concept, it worked, and then over the past few years we've been like kind of tweaking, improving things. There are so many different scenarios out there. One thing, for example, that we put out there, because once you start using something like binary cache, all the dependencies, they need to be very explicit. So Twist needs to know in detail what depends on what. We cannot miss anything. Because like in Xcode projects, you can implicitly depend on things. That's information that Twist doesn't have. So there was one developer that contributed this CLI command that basically through a static code analysis, it can tell you are importing something that you are not explicitly depending on. And this is amazing because it helps you make sure that you are explicitly defining your dependencies. This is something that Apple is also pushing for. And in the same way, before I recommended everyone to use synchronized groups in Xcode, this is the second piece of that I would recommend developers doing because we think that explicitness is just about optimizing the build, but it's also about the reliability of features that are built into Xcode, like on the build system, like incremental builds, like previews and everything. If I understand what your thing depends on, if I understand the whole dependency graph that hangs from your preview, I know what I need to build, I know what is missing, and I know what changes are necessary to get everything to a state where the preview works. If I don't know your graph, then you try to open the preview and suddenly the preview doesn't work. What you see as a developer is a broken setup. Why you go to that point, you don't really know. But I can tell you, the more explicit things are, the better. So all these features that Apple is putting out there, even though you don't really see the direct value, there is a transitive benefit to you. So do it.
Okay, great. Maybe you didn't speak about algorithms that you use it in to check this. I understand. I understand.
Since I can very simply, like you have a graph. No, your app depends on B, B depends on C. So from C, you start checking. Do I have a binary? Then use the binary. Then you continue with the next node. Do I have a binary?
Yeah.
Then use the binary. And that's it. Just
Yes.
graph traversing and replacement of
I don't know, like DFS, like depth first search. We try to search in every dependency, or BFS, something like that, to check the dependency and who need others in. I think that Apple have this kind of check, but with Tuist we have optimized this, and really we appreciate that. Great. There is always a question that the community, I think, from there is also understanding when we use dynamic and what we call static linking. And I think it's very important when you speak about dependency graph, implicit, explicit things. In my mind, I think, okay, but what is the relation between this and what we call dynamic and static linking? Because we find the problem sometimes when we are at runtime, in runtime, or in the compilation. From your point of view, you recommend using dynamic library during development or static library, and which is the most suitable for Tuist? Kind of.
We recommend using as many frameworks as you can as dynamic in development. There are a couple of reasons for that. The one that is kind of the main one is that the incremental compilation becomes faster, because each dynamic framework is sort of its own piece, whereas if you have static frameworks, then as you compile the code, all the symbols kind of get copied,
embedded
into other places. So for example, what we've also seen, like features like previews, because of that, work much better with dynamic frameworks. Apple realizes that dynamic frameworks are better for development, but they're not better for releasing your app, because that does impact your upload time. So you generally, like, the rule of thumb is try to have as many things dynamic in development and as many things as static when you go and archive your app. Because of how Xcode targets are defined, or even with VM, it's kind of, it wasn't designed for this switching. So Apple came up with this mergeable library concept, which basically is that the library is sort of in this super state, and then Xcode decides whether it's going to be dynamic or static. The problem with that is suddenly your graph is not explicit anymore. Like, you don't know if it's going to be dynamic or static. It's kind of the decision is being made at build time. So that's why, even if you can use in Tuist this mergeable libraries, we do recommend still making it explicit that it's either like which ones are dynamic or static, and then you can use environment variables or different configuration from the CLI to explicitly say, I want these frameworks now to be dynamic because I'm developing them or whatnot. So that's sort of our rule of thumb, but obviously there are cases where things have to be dynamic, and sometimes you cannot get around that, and that's fine. But the rule of thumb generally is like defaulting to dynamic in development and static to when you go in and archive your app.
Yes, when you spoke about mergeable framework, this new kinds of framework, if we can say it, I don't think that Apple improved the using or recommend the using of this kind of mergeable framework. I don't know. This was a talk, I think one or two talk in the WWDC 2023 about mergeable framework. There is a lot of people that go, okay, we try to using this fantastic kind of type of framework, and I don't know why. Until now, I don't. I think that a lot of developers don't migrate or make this kind of transition to this kind of mergeable framework. Why?
I think
Have any-
I think the problem that they are trying to solve makes sense, which is
Hmm.
development dynamic, release static.
Yes.
That the motivation is amazing. That needs to happen
Yes.
for the reasons that Marek described. But then
Yes.
the problem is that the build system of Xcode is too old, and they're asking the build system to do many
Hmm.
things. Decide
Okay.
static and dynamic, run builds phase, script build phases, resolving macros. All these things are complexity at build time. And they're adding build
Hmm.
time complexity to a build system that wasn't designed from the ground up to have these concepts built in. So what we're experiencing as developers is the build system is struggling to actually provide a nice developer experience with those features. So we actually are hesitant, like we've seen that in customers and users that they try not to use script build phases
Hmm.
because that adds complexity. We've seen people
Yes.
avoiding macros because of the
Yes.
same reason.
Complexity.
We recommend not using embeddable frameworks because of the same reason. So when I think of features that Apple announces as this is now possible, I look at them and wonder if this is going to add more complexity to a build system and a project where my previous are not working and my builds are not incremental as they should, then I should not add more. In any
Yes.
case, I should remove things. When Apple changes the build system to kind of incorporate these ideas or like make these solutions build into the build system in a way that they feel like integrated into it, then that's a whole different story. But we come from a world where the build system was designed I don't know how long ago. So suddenly macros, build phases, embeddable thingies,
Yes.
it's really a lot for the build system. So we recommend not doing these things, even though like you have talks and like documents from Apple saying you can do this.
Yes.
The fact that Apple says you can do this doesn't mean it's the best solution for the job. It's the same as the Swift Package Manager. The fact that people say that it can be used as a project manager, it doesn't mean it's the best solution for the job. And that's
Hmm.
actually a struggle that we have in Twist, that people come to us with, I've been told to do this. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Like, it is not great at scale. Like, it's your decision in the end, but like, we don't think it's a good idea. But I've seen, well, you can see a lot of things, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea. What Apple does internally, I don't know, but I tell you, they are not using many of the things that are putting out there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pedro, for this explanation. Okay, we can go further with another tool that I liked very much. It's what we call to generate a preview without going through test flight. I think it's very convenient solution. And from your point of view, from your feedback, what kind of feedback you receive about this solution? I think that I don't. Sorry for maybe a mistake. There is another solution that came to quickly give the opportunity to customer, to clients, to test the application without passing by test flight. I know that your solution is very secure compared to other, but I need to have first of all your philosophy behind this feature, because that exists before for some other kind of company. I missed the name of the company that do that, but what motivated you to have this kind of features in Twist, and what are the more specific things in your preview using Twist? I don't know, Marek, can you maybe?
So, as Pedro mentioned, everything that we do is we look at it through the lens of developer productivity. And a tool like TestFlight has not necessarily been built with through those lenses. That's more
Okay.
for how can developers ship things to quality assurance teams or to external testers, and that's sort of the main function of the feature. What we've instead tried to build was something that would be more lightweight and easier for you to, when I create a PR, how can I test those changes as quickly as possible with as little
Yes.
friction as possible? And TestFlight is not frictionless. It's maybe frictionful, which is not a word,
Yes.
but so for that, we needed a way how we can quickly share simulator builds also, not just device builds. Developers are used to testing things on simulators, so how can we just take a simulator build that you maybe already have on your machine, or that's already built through your CI pipeline, and those builds are faster than device builds, and how you can quickly test it on your end. So taking the simulator build, uploading that, and then we built a macOS menu bar app to kind of make it easier for make it easier for you to select a specific simulator that you want to test the specific app on. So the other part is that, for example, Apple has never really been that good at is making things accessible from the web. And web is very lightweight. You can just grab a URL and share it with somebody and do the action that you want to do there with so that's the other part that we've kind of tried to build into the features, so that when you share an app, then you get a URL, and then URL is kind of accessible by everybody in the team, and then you can either share it in your or like you can use GitHub app to share it in your PR, and then I go to a PR and I just can click on the link, and through the app it gets automatically run on my simulator, and I can get the app running sort of just by clicking on the link, which is not something that you get with the test flight. So there are two parts to it, I think. One is sharing things as quickly as possible, make it kind of trivial to share your app. And the other part is make it trivial to run it on arbitrary simulator or device. And by that, the primary focus has been to facilitate quickly sharing specific PRs or specific kind of changes that you've made locally. Long term, we might also solve similar things that Tesla has been solving, but for now, this has been the focus of the feature. So if you're sort of struggling that you have to go to a PR, check out the branch, and pull the changes, build it, and then you get to see the thing, then kind of that's where Tuist Previews comes in. You just put it into your CI pipeline, you run Tuist Share after what you probably already have, which is like you're probably already building an app in some way or another. So you only add Tuist Share after that, and that kind of makes it available for people to immediately test those things.
Okay, great. Let's come to another question about preview sharing. There is possibility to have what we call the external tester, or only for what we call team that uses the application can. There is something related to security that came to my mind, or no? Because we have, I think that this kind of tools that come with the account, and for external tester, there is a possibility to have external tester for using the app preview or not until now.
That's not the main concern. You can share device builds, and those device builds need to be signed, and that's currently responsibility of you as a team or as an organization to make sure that the app that you sign also has all the devices included in the provisioning profile. And that's already sort of that's already a security feature by in and of itself. You cannot install an app on a device that has not been included in the provisioning profile. So unless you have access to the code and to the signing, you cannot really install it anyways. So yeah, you can share device builds, but you need to sign them first. Making signing easier is another topic that is generally has been plaguing the iOS community for quite some time, and that's something that we want to eventually tackle as well. There is Fastly signing, but we think there's some space to make the flow a little bit more convenient for folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like And then there, like when you think of the web ecosystem, there are tools like Vercel and Netlify that when you open a PR,
Yes.
you get a status with a link so that you can preview your changes. That has never existed on this ecosystem because like getting a preview takes time. So by the time the preview is ready, you just merge the PR. But that has the consequence that people don't test the changes. They just look at the code, which is something that AI is gonna do soon. So if AI is
Maybe.
gonna review and then your CI is making sure that everything compiles, who makes sure that the feature is implemented in the way that was supposed to be implemented. Tests, well, not really. Like there are so many scenarios that it's always good for people to test it manually. Like I get the app and then I test, I don't know, some new setting option, make sure that it works. Shopify encouraged that in the culture. They had this thing called Top Hat, and every developer, as part of their review, they had to test the feature. But if you want people to
Yes.
test, testing has to be fast. But if it's slow, people don't do it. So then you keep merging, you keep merging. And then at some point, you are so unconfident about the release that you involve beta testers. Because no one tested anything before. So a week later, like someone tests something and they're like, actually, this thing is broken. But at that point, it's so detached from the PR that finding who introduced that, what PR was it, like it's all friction. Whereas if you encourage, you do like continuous feedback. I think that would be a good name for it, like continuously
Okay.
giving
Fe-
feedback directly on the PR. Then the whole idea of nightly build, the idea of beta testers becomes less important because by the time the thing is merged, maybe 3 developers use the preview to test it to give feedback, and this is we would like to. What we have now is a very initial version of it. There are a lot of things that we would like to do. One of them, for example, that Vercel has it is even the idea of giving feedback right there. Like once you give feedback, how do you make sure that the feedback is funnel to the author of the PR?
yes.
You have that
Yes.
context in the bill somehow. But if you do nightly bills, the information is gone. It's a nightly bill, it's a number, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't have information about the PR. But if you do a preview
Yes.
with a PR, then someone right from the ad, they can give feedback, and then we can make sure that the message, the feedback, reaches the developer. This is new in this ecosystem, so we're struggling to actually tell people this is actually possible. We are making sure that those previews are generated as fast as they can, and you don't have to deal with the complexity of signing and all these things. That's our goal, but it takes time because people come from this world where there's App Center, there is Test Flight.
Yes. A test
Like,
flight.
how
Bit
does someone
highs.
get to App Center? It's not App Center. We are not App Center. We are not Test Flight. We are something new. The idea is that we build the app. That's what we have in common. We build the app, but we make it super easy for you to run. And conceptually, it's a different kind of. We are not really targeting beta testers. We're targeting product managers, developers that should be running and playing with the app as part of building features, not a nightly build that I get 2 days later. No, writing API, you test it, you give feedback. Once everyone is happy, you merge. That's the whole idea of it.
Yes. Yes. Great. That come to my last question about your vision about Twist. What kind of features, especially with coming of AI, artificial intelligence, etc. What kind? When you spoke
Yeah.
about AI that try to compare to check. Okay, but how Pedro and Marek think about their vision about Twist? What kind of feature, especially with the using of AI? And it's not come for only a Twist, for any tools, the using of AI to optimize the role of things that do the tools, maybe also for Xcode, because now they spoke about Xcode only for what you call the auto completion, something like that. But I think that maybe AI come to optimize the role or the time of build phases. Think about that, all this stuff. What do you think? What are your vision about Twist, and especially in the introduction of AI? Maybe.
I mean, there are so on the product side, we want to build the best productivity platform for initially Apple developers, like all the Apple platforms. Eventually, there's the idea of like maybe we go on to Android and React Native, but we want to be this one-stop shop for productivity because it doesn't exist. There are some developer productivity tools, some tools for representing graphs like Grafana and all these things, but like one tool where you plug it into your project and suddenly you get access to all these optimizations and data out of the box. Something like that doesn't exist. The second thing that we're doing is we're making sure that all the things that we build, with exception of caching, they work with Xcode projects. So you don't have to migrate anything. You ask before What does it take to migrate? We don't want people to migrate anything. You take your project, install the CLI, you run one command, you're good to go. You have a dashboard, you have optimizations, you have previews,
Yes.
anything to do in your project. So that's a second stream of work that's going to happen. So if anyone is listening to this podcast and you
Yes.
get excited about the idea of having analytics to understand your projects or use previews, you don't really need to migrate anything. You can just install the CLI and give it a shot. Then we'll collect a lot of data, not to train our models. Your data is your data.
Okay.
We are not doing anything like that. However, because we have data from your projects, you can then, these LLMs like Claude and ChatGPT, they're exploring the idea of like having a standard interface to kind of access the data. So we'll provide a standard interface, a standard data set, so that you can plug your AI tools into your own data, and then you can ask questions. We are just a tool of standardizing and collecting data. We standardize and collect, no more. We don't train anything. It's your data. We present the data so that you have the graph, and you can plug your AI tool into this, and you can ask questions. In our world, a developer should start working, let's say today. They open ChatGPT or Claude, and they ask, what is the most flaky test in my code base that is blocking everyone in my team? Tell me which test it is, and I'll fix it. And then you fix it. We don't do the job. We still don't know how to code. Maybe the Copilot will do it. We don't do that work for you. But the fact that we tell you what those things are, it's already a huge win. And the same goes for like bottlenecks in compilation. So which is the target that is preventing more parallelization? This is the one. Then you should do something about it. And we tell you what you should do about it. You still do the coding part, but it's really a lot. So imagine this platform that you can plug your Xcode project into. We can talk to other services. We can build your app and push it to test flight. We can continue to solve problems and frictions for developers. And eventually, imagine this being something that you use on Android and something that you use on React Native. So if your company, we've seen that companies, when they pay for services, they like to pay for one service that kind of solves Android and iOS side of things. So we want to be this unified platform that works across different ecosystems. And with a focus on productivity, we'll see in the future, but we'll continue in the productivity space.
Okay, Marek, if you have something to add, maybe to what Pedro said.
AI, I think that already mostly sums it up. Like we want you to be able to ask questions about your projects and get kind of answers in a way that you can just interact with the whole thing using natural language. In terms of features, insights is our current focus. So that basically means we want to start getting, like we already gather some data. We want to start gathering more data so that the information also that we would then pass to the AI would be more useful. The more we know about your project, the better answers you might be getting. And then once we are sort of satisfied on the insights part, then there are a couple of, like, something that we've already mentioned here, like signing is a common denominator that's plaguing a lot of people. CI is also a space that we would like to sort of blow some innovation into. So, but in the end, we're like we're trying to kind of iterate on the product with users and customers. And if there's anything that's kind of plaguing you or anybody listening to it, anybody can also just send us a message, and like we're like constantly shifting priorities based on what we see people are struggling with the most.
Yes, it was the target of this podcast to speak about Tuist and using, for people that didn't know, but I think that a lot of the community developers know about Tuist and try to use it. Thank you, Marek and Pedro, for this episode, the third episode for the season 2. Really amazing with expert around the world. And see you soon, maybe in other episode to speak about Tuist more technically. We speak a lot of technically about Tuist, but I think that you have a lot of things to share with the community. We'll try to share all the documentation links in the description of the episode, especially on YouTube, and also that will be available in Apple Podcast very soon in this month, in the end of this month, hopefully. And thank you, Pedro and Marek. Thank you. See you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.